Hi, my name is Dave Reske, CEO of Now Speed Marketing, and welcome to this edition of Marketing in the Now, where we focus on uncovering the myths of marketing and leadership with some of the world's most interesting people. And my guest today is Mitch Duckler. Mitch is founder and managing director of Full Surge, a brand and marketing strategy consultancy based in Chicago, Illinois. He has more than 30 years of brand management and marketing consulting experience at large companies like Unilever, Coca-Cola, and Profit. His client base includes Fortune 500 companies and numerous world-class brands like ExxonMobil, Deloitte, Cox, and he has a wealth of experience. So Mitch, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dave. It's great to be here with you.
And I understand you've just finished a book, or you have a book out called The Future Ready Brand. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
Sure. It's The Future Ready Brand is a book that is just actually a couple of weeks ago launched. And it is the story of how the confluence of societal and technological forces are shaping the world of marketing and brand building in a pretty profound way. So what do I mean by that? On the societal front, I talk about three societal trends in particular. One is transparency and purpose. Another is changing attitudes towards health and wellness. And then a third on the emergence of Gen Z. And then in the technology or the emerging technology section, I talk about three in particular. One is intelligence, so that's AI, predictive analytics, machine learning, and so forth. A second on reality, so extended reality, AR, VR, metaverse, and then a third on Web3, which is blockchain, NFTs, and so forth. And then there's another section of the book, which is how those technologies in particular are impacting several fairly important aspects of marketing activation, such as content marketing, gamification, and influencer marketing. Now, importantly, I'm not an expert in really any of those technologies per se. So what I did is I went out and interviewed 43 CMOs to get their take on these technologies and how it's impacting what they do on a day-to-day basis. Mostly Fortune 500 CMOs. Actually, 17 of the 43 CMOs are on Fortune's 50 most influential CMOs in the world. So that's basically how the book came to be.
Wow, what an amazing research project! We had some amazing conversations with all of those folks. So let's kind of dig into that concept a little bit further. So I often start with this mythbuster question, as you know. And so the mythbuster question we talked about, I know that technology is changing rapidly, and we all read about all the things you talked about in the headlines, but it's really not going to affect my brand. I could just kind of continue my brand strategy as it is, no matter what's happening with AI or blockchain or the societal factors that are happening. Is that true or not true?
I would argue, and I think the CMOs that I spoke with argue that is definitely not true. In fact, they went as far as saying that a number of them actually said that they believe the time we're in right now, the early to mid 2020s, are as disruptive as the late 90s, early 2000s were with the dawn of the internet. And digital marketing. It is really that profound. So can you ignore them? Sure, but you probably would do so at your own peril because there is a lot changing, right? And for those who aren't kind of getting on board now and at least tinkering and experimenting and testing and learning with some of these different technologies, not to mention the societal forces that I talked about earlier, you're going to be behind the eight ball pretty quickly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you see it as product changes for these CMOs? In other words, are their core products changing, and so they have to affect the brand has to change, or is there kind of a brand marketing or a brand strategy implication to these societal factors and technology factors that you're seeing?
I think it's a little of each. I would say, in fact, the way the book is organized, it almost addresses the different aspects of a CMO's role that each force might affect. So the societal trends, as I mentioned, the transparency, health and wellness attitudes, Gen Z as a primary generational cohort, those I think have fairly profound implications for how brands are being positioned. We need to understand what's going on in society, right? What's important? How are attitudes changing? How are consumers changing, right? And while it's certainly dangerous to say Gen Z is one homogeneous body of consumers, they do have some traits that are fairly salient, right? And that marketers need to really understand, as well as the other two issues in terms of how their brands are positioned. And then the next three chapters where we get into the technologies, the AI and the extended realities in particular, as well as blockchain, that's around how brands are experienced. And there it's, clearly the offers and the experiences are much more personalized and much more immersive with these emerging technologies. So it's really kind of a little bit of everything. A lot of it depending too on the type of business that you're marketing.
Yeah, I'm sure it varied business to business.
Exactly.
As you did your interviews and had these conversations, was there one of, you mentioned at least six, maybe more different core technologies, nine, I counted, I think, properly. Was there any consensus about the biggest impact? Is it AI that's going to change that most people are concerned about, or is it gamification, or is it, health and wellness trends? Is there one overriding if our listeners had to focus on one thing to kind of really get smart about now? Can you identify that, or is it important to really think broadly about all these things simultaneously so you get a handle on everything at the same time to make sure you're on top of it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think um, it's interesting as I spoke with CMOs about these topics. I think the fact that they all kind of spark to different ones, right, and in relatively equal numbers, I'd say, um, it says that they're all fairly relevant, right? And I think that they might be resonating with different CMOs for different reasons, right? But I would say in terms of the societal trends, the one that really peaked, which kind of surprised me, was purpose. And the reason why it surprised me is because that's not a new topic, right? That is something that I think has been on the radar of marketers for decades, right? But I think it's continuing to to be kind of front and center in terms of how brands are being positioned today. CMOs are talking about the intersection of corporate purpose and brand positioning to a greater extent than they have in the past. And they believe that this trend is going to continue, especially given the emergence of Gen Z. And the fact that, again, as a cohort, at least, Gen Z tends to be very purpose driven, right? So I'd say that in that section, it was definitely purpose. And the technology, absolutely AI by far. That was dominant, which was kind of interesting also because I think when I began interviewing for the book, those three chapters I would have put on equal footing: AI, metaverse, and Web3, in terms of their evolution. And over the course of the last 18 months, it's been all AI, right? And I think that was reflected in a lot of my interviews too. Almost every CMO I spoke with was willing to talk about and very versed in artificial intelligence. It was a little harder to find ones that were really knee deep in the realities and the Web3. And then on the activation side, content marketing is still forefront out of those three.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. So CMOs are really thinking about this. They're trying to get their arms around it. They're trying to figure out really how to address this most effectively. Are they doing that, in your interviews from are they hiring consultants to help them figure this out? Do they have teams? What's the process that you see them using to think about the impact of these brands, and how do they kind of move from, yeah, it's interesting, to, man, I got to really do something, to here's what I'm actually going to do?
Yeah, they talk about it in a few different ways. I think first, a lot of them talked about just this, not just for them, but for their teams, really establishing this foundation of understanding, just mastering the basics. And they feel that no matter what role you're in within marketing and probably even beyond for that matter, you need to have this base understanding of a particular, what is artificial intelligence, for example, what is machine learning, what is predictive analytics, and how can it be used in marketing for competitive advantage. So it's really kind of establishing um, that base level understanding. Another thing that I thought was a common theme from a lot of the interviews is the importance of experimenting, test and learn, prototype, pilot, whatever you want to call it. But it's you don't necessarily, you're not going to essentially change everything overnight. Rather, what you do is you pick a small part of your business. Perhaps it's a division or a product category or product line that you want to experiment with, versus just kind of saying, okay, we're entirely AI centric now, right? And what that does, obviously, is it gives you a chance to kind of test and learn. I mean, minimizes risk. Um, Especially with some of the extended realities. And it minimizes also your upfront investment if you're just testing it on a smaller scale. So I think that was an important piece as well. And then I think the final message was that it requires hands-on. There's only so much you can learn through reading and through taking courses and so forth. While that's important for establishing that base foundation, eventually you got to just kind of jump in and get your hands dirty, so to speak.
Yeah, and is there kind of one type of project you seeing them take on more frequently, or are there different projects across the board that address these 9 areas?
Well, I think the ones that they were taking on, certainly the low-hanging fruit is generative AI. I would say almost. I'm not sure I talked to anyone who isn't using that in some way, shape, or form. Again, there's some limits, and especially in companies that are a little bit more risk averse or companies that are in heavily regulated industries. There might be a little bit more caution, but they're all using it in some way, shape, or form, and just kind of testing it to see how it can impact their productivity, their efficiency, and so forth. I think that was probably one of the more common ones. In terms of some of the other technologies like the extended reality and metaverse, again, they're experimenting maybe just on a small scale. Instead of building out an entire metaverse, they're playing around with some of the underlying technologies. Or they're going to metaverse, but without the Oculus 3D immersive visual reality experience, right? So they're in metaverse, but in what they're calling Metaverse 2.5. Or I'm sorry, Web 2.5, meaning web metaverse without the immersive technology. So those are just examples, I think, of how they're kind of jumping in where it makes sense and mitigating risk by crawling and then walking and then eventually running.
And a lot of your research and your interviews were really with large company CMOs, but it sounds like you've had some experience with medium or smaller company marketers. How do you see the large companies addressing these challenges differently than the small companies?
I think the biggest difference is just their level of commitment. So again, if you think about some of the technologies, and we can use AI just as an example, there's various ways you can access it. So, I mean, just take generative AI, for example, Chat GPT, right? For $20 a month or what have you, you have access to this technology, and companies are using, small companies. I mean, there's not a company around really that probably can't justify that expense. As you get a little bit larger in size, you might be customizing your GPTs, right? So you're training models, and to your own company's IP, for example, training it to your brand voice and personality and so forth. So that's a little bit more investment, right? You're spending in the thousands now to essentially make a chat GPT yours, right? Uniquely yours. And then the bigger companies are, for certain AI technologies, they're looking to bring it entirely in-house and build it from scratch and make it proprietary. So those are kind of, I think, different levels of how sophisticated you can get with the technology, and a lot of it does just depend on your appetite for experimentation and budget.
Yeah, so I can definitely see the operational side of that, especially those technologies, how it's going to affect products, how it's going to affect operations, how it's going to affect teams, how it's going to affect people. How do you see it affecting the brand itself, the brand promise, the messaging in the companies? Are they starting to talk about that in their external marketing, their external communications? Are they starting to talk about product shifts? Or is it more, especially on the technology side, is it more still in the R&D side, and they believe it's going to affect the brand or the brand promise in the future? Are you starting to, in other words, are you starting to see the effect on the brand now, today?
I would say it depends on the topic in particular. So at least with the CMOs I spoke with on AI, not so much, right? I think they're using it, but they're not necessarily trumpeting the fact that they are, right? And in fact, if anything, they might be trying to play it down, right? They're not trying to say, "Hey, generated by AI," and all of these things that used to be human centric are now artificial intelligence, right? But then if you look at the extended reality, that's obviously a very different animal, right? Where they are kind of saying, look, our experience is much more immersive than it ever was, right? It's much more interactive and hands-on, through technology such as augmented and virtual reality. So I think it really depends on the technology itself as to how out in front and overt CMOs and their departments are being with it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in the first area, so thinking about purpose and health and wellness and Gen Z values, are you seeing those attitudes and those kind of messages find their way directly into marketing? Is that kind of a very, almost a one-to-one connection between these values, these thoughts and actually ads and content and messages and website stories and all of that? Are you seeing that direct connection already?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I think it just in terms of the aspect of brand building, I think that is most impacted by a lot of the societal trends, as I mentioned earlier, is positioning, right? So I think a lot of CMOs, as they think about like how their brand or their brands are being positioned, are thinking about purpose, more so than ever before. So even companies that are or were purpose driven um, are beginning to think about, wow, is this also how my brand is positioned? Because it doesn't have to be, right? You can have a purpose, you can even be purpose driven, but not define your brand, the essence of your brand positioning by it. But there are a number of CMOs I spoke with during their interviews where they talk about, yeah, our corporate purpose is really the basis for our master brand positioning. So you're actually seeing it, being woven into one of the most critical aspects of brand strategy. Obviously, the same thing goes for health and wellness in terms of there. I think the big thing is, companies that you may not think of as being health or wellness brands, as wellness begins to be more broadly defined, more holistic. Um, it's companies that aren't in the so-called healthcare space are beginning to think about, hey, how do we actually weave this into our positioning and our value proposition? And then obviously the same with Gen Z, right? Clearly, as Gen Z becomes a more critical target segment or target generation, at least for brands, you need to really understand them at a very sophisticated level in order to have your brands positioned well against them.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So where what's happening to brands that are not thinking this way? So are they we say they're getting left behind. So, brands that are just not thinking about AI, the new technologies, extended reality, they're just kind of like, hey, we've got maybe they're an insurance company or a financial services company or, you know, retailer, and they're just kind of going down the path. What are the risks to them of kind of ignoring these mega trends that you're talking about?
I would say the short-term immediate risks are minimal because a number of these technologies, even AI to a certain extent, are still nascent. They're still emerging. And certainly metaverse and Web3 it's very early. And if you're not knee deep in it right now, it may not be a problem. I think the issue again, and that was really the premise of the book, is future, right? The future ready brand it's the old notion, it's the Wayne Gretzky skate to where the puck is going, right? It's their belief, and I would agree that these technologies are the future, right? They will shape the future of how brands are positioned, how they're activated in the future. And again, they draw a lot of analogies back to the dawn of digital marketing, where okay, for a certain point in time, if you weren't savvy on website development or e-commerce, email marketing, social mobile, for a while you weren't really at a disadvantage, but if you aren't today or even 10 years ago, you probably are irrelevant, right? You're a dinosaur, you left behind. And I think it's similar here, right? It's not to say overnight that you're going to become irrelevant. But over time, certainly you will. And at a minimum, you're going to be at a disadvantage to brands that are embracing these technologies proactively today.
Yeah, and I don't know if you can think of any or share publicly any examples, maybe some from the book, but is there a company or two that's doing this really well that you feel like um, that is kind of being thoughtful about the process, the systems, the investment, the strategy, the thinking on this? Any examples you can share?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one example that I talk about in the book, and I think it's one of the best examples of using multiple of the technologies that we've been talking about, is Sephora.
Mm.
And I spoke with the CMO of Sephora, and he talked about how AI is being used for a combination of micro segmentation and hyper personalization. So, what do I mean by that? Micro segmentation is the ability to understand consumers at a much more granular or micro level, right? So instead of your typical segmentation schema, which might have 5 or 6 segments, it's no, that's no longer sufficient. We want to break it down based on 10 or 12 or 14 different variables and understand consumers at a much more granular level. So in his case, he said, imagine somebody walks into my store, right, and we can ask AI and say this person is from Australia. They have a dry skin, hazel eyes, blonde hair. They're fairly complected. Their skin is somewhat sensitive. They're looking for SPF protection, right? What would you recommend, right? And it will come out with okay, here are 3 products that we would recommend based on and those parameters. It's getting down to a really micro level that really wasn't possible, at least certainly not at scale before. And then what was really fascinating is he took it one step further and like, okay, that now imagine through augmented reality, you can actually see what that product looks like on you, right? On your specific face, right? Without actually having to try it on. And the benefits of that are obvious, right? You can all of a sudden sample, if you will, 5 or 7 different products, within a minute. And that to me really stood out as, embracing these technologies, and not just one, but multiple of them, and doing so on a more hyper personal level and in a much more immersive manner.
Interesting. So it's really it's a blends the technology with the product strategy, the service strategy with the brand strategy. It all has to come
Yeah,
together. I guess gone are the days where the brand strategists could sit in the ivory tower and come up with cool messaging that they thought the public would like. The Mad Men days, perhaps, right?
And they have, as he said, they have hundreds of thousands of products,
Yeah.
thousands. So it's overwhelming. It's really impossible for the human mind to process all of that. And sure, so you can try to do your best without the technology, but the technology just gives you so much more possibility, right? And like I said, to do it at scale, to do it efficiently and quickly.
Yeah, and enable humans to interact with their customers at a whole different level. So
Exactly.
fascinating. Well, I can't wait to read your book. It sounds like an exciting opportunity. As you said, it's just been out for a little while. Congratulations on that.
Thank
That's
you.
wonderful.
Thank you.
And if people want to buy it, what's the best place to look for it?
So a couple of things. It's available on my company's website. So my company is Full Surge, FULLSURGE. We're a brand and marketing strategy consultancy. You go on to fullsurge.com, you can see both that book as well as my previous book, The Indispensable Brand, are detailed there. And then both books are also available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and virtually anywhere you would buy books, you can find those books as well.
That's great. And if people want to connect with you and learn more about you or your firm or your services, what's the best
Yep.
way to do that?
Likewise, fullsurge.com. Yeah, I'm reachable through there, and Duckler at fullsurge.com. I'm also on LinkedIn, Mitch Duckler, and those are probably the two best ways to find me.
That's great. Well, Mitch, again, thanks for taking the time. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to be with you.